Welcome to this comprehensive course that serves as an introduction to Excel for people who work in or want to work in finance. We're going to start off with the absolute basics of what is Excel, what are some of its features, then move on to some of the basic formulas that you really ought to know if you want to work in this field. And then we'll progress to some even more complicated formulas that are extremely useful to know. Let's take a look. You can download all the files used in this course to follow along for free using the link in this video's description below. In this very basic introductory video, we'll be going over how you can interface with this extremely powerful software, Microsoft Excel. At the top of your screen, you'll see what's called the ribbon. And within the ribbon, there's many features that we can use. We're currently on the Home tab, but there's many tabs on the ribbon, such as Insert, Page Layout, Formulas, and each one of them have many features. As we move along in this course, you'll get familiar with most of the features in this ribbon in Excel. Now below that, we have the Workspace, which is this area. In the Workspace, there are columns, which are identified with letters, A, B, C, D, etc. And there are rows, which are numerical, 1, 2, 3, etc. As we move to the right on the columns, you'll see that once we get past Z, we get to the point where there are two letters back to back. So AA, AB, AC, and this will continue on like this all the way till we reach the end of the limit of the sheet, which is over 16,000 columns. Now, as far as rows go, there's over 1 million rows in Excel, 1,048,576 to be exact. And I can tell you, as a longtime user of Excel, I've never run into the problem of running out of column space, but there are many times where I've ran out of row space, just because a lot of times you have really long tables of data that can't fit into an entire sheet. Regardless though, you can see that Excel is an extremely powerful software with tons of room for data, and you can almost use it as a database at times because of how much data that it can store. And you'll see down here at the bottom, we have multiple sheets, sheet 1, 2, 3, etc. So we've just gone over the features of one single sheet, but we can add more sheets by hitting this plus sign, new sheet. So I've added another one and another and another. And then if we don't want one of these sheets, we can right click on it and hit delete sheet. There's no limit that I'm aware of to the number of sheets that you can have in a single workbook in Excel. And now this collection, all of these sheets in this single file, is called an Excel workbook. Now, each cell is identified by its coordinates of the row and column associated with it. So if I click into this cell, you can see that we are in cell C7. And if we want to refer to this cell with any formulas, we can see up here in the name box that this cell is called C7. And then we also have the formula bar right here, which is going to be very useful because it can autofill formulas as we move on later in this course. See, if I type equals S, we can see it comes up with all of the formulas available to us that start with an S. And so we're going to go through many of these formulas as we move along with the real-world projects that we work on in this course. Let's go over how to enter, edit, and delete text, numbers, and dates in Excel. I can select any cell, say B2 for example. You can see now that I've highlighted this cell, we have B and 2 highlighted. I can enter data or numbers or anything by just starting to type. So I'll type Sunday, enter. And when I hit enter, you can notice that I drop to the row below. Now I'm in B3. However, if I had hit tab, I would end up in C2. It keeps me on the same row. Now I can type Monday. If I wanted to enter the value or change the value in this cell, edit the value, I can hit F2. And you'll see when I hit F2, the dashing line appears and I could continue typing. Excel is very intuitively intelligent in certain ways. And one way is that it can recognize that I have a pattern going and it can continue that pattern. So if I highlight this whole range and then I grab this green box in the bottom right of the range and hold the left click on my mouse and drag down, it will just continue to fill in more days. Now we can say which day of the week is each one of these days. So we can type 1 for Sunday. I'll hit enter, then 2, enter. And now if I want to go all the way down, again, I can highlight that range, grab that green box, and drag all the way down to Saturday, 7. It looks like I included too many days when I was dragging down the days. Now, there's a number of different ways that we can delete these. I can just select one cell, and I can hit delete on my keyboard. But imagine if I regretted doing that. How could I bring that value back? There's two different ways. I could either hit this undo arrow up here, and now I have Tuesday back, or I could hit Control Z on my keyboard, and now Tuesday's back again. Another way I can delete values is I could just grab all 3 of them in a range and hit delete, and now they're gone. And one final way I can delete them, if I wanted to clear the values and the formatting, is I could highlight the whole thing. I can go to this clear command here, and I can hit clear all. Okay? And now let's imagine that I wanted to know what specific date each one of these days is. Well, let's say just hypothetically that Sunday was the 19th of March of 2023, and I'll hit enter. And now again, I can just drag this all the way down. And Excel will show you what format that it views these values as. So if I click in this cell, I can see Excel's viewing this as a date. Over here, it's viewing it as general. But if I change it to text, it would remain the exact same. So this is text. And general is just Excel's general formatting. It means no specific formatting. We could change any of these days to the number format. And now you'll see there's decimals added, and we could just get rid of those by hitting this decrease decimal command twice. In the last video, we briefly went over some introductory formatting techniques, but now we're going to go over some advanced techniques, and specifically, how could I take a table of data and make it look really nice? So as you can see on the screen right now, we've got a table of data with 4 columns. Stocks ticker, the name of the company, the price of the stock, and the annual returns. And you can see these columns are just completely fake. I'm just using them as an example. But we can see some problems immediately when we look at this table. For example, some of these tickers are aligned to the left, some are to the right. We want them all to be unified. So how I can fix this is I can just select this entire range. And then I can go up to, in this alignment bar, the left align, or align left, and I'll just click that. And now we can see we've got them all uniformly aligned. It's looking much better. Also, this column, we can't even see the whole full header. It cuts off short, and then we can't even see some of the names. So if I put my mouse here, and we see this little T symbol, and I double click, it will make the column the exact width that fits everything. Now for the price column, I think I'd like to see this in the currency format. So I'm going to highlight all of these, and I can go up here and I can click on this $sign to change it to the accounting number format. Or I could have changed it that way by highlighting that row and then going into here and click accounting as well. Now for the returns, I'd like to see these as a percentage. So I can highlight this whole area, and then I can go up into this number format here and hit percent style. There we go. And let's just say hypothetically, I'd like to see this to the second decimal place, so I can add 2 decimals by clicking this button twice. I could have also changed this percentage by clicking this down arrow and going and finding percentage here. Now this table's starting to look pretty good, but I think there's a few things we can do to make it look even better. I think I'd like to see the columns of this table bolded. So I'm just going to highlight this whole row, and I can make these bold by either hitting Control B on my keyboard, like that, or I can highlight them all and I can come up here and click the bold command here. I think maybe I'd also like them to be italic. So I could make them italic by clicking this I here, or I could hit Control I on my keyboard, and now they're bold and italic, and we can see that both the B and the I are shaded, so we know we've done that correctly. Now another thing I'd like to do is I'd like to change the colors of the cells so that the table has a different color background than the column headers. And I can do that by selecting this range. I'll go to the fill here, and then I'll hit this drop down arrow, and I have plenty of options here. So I think maybe I'd like to have a light orange for these column headers, and then a light gray for all the data in the table. So let's just add a nice light gray. And I think one thing that would make this whole sheet look a little bit better is if I got rid of all of these grid lines throughout the sheet. So I'm going to go up to View, and then I will uncheck this box Grid Lines. And now I think our table of data is looking quite a bit more professional. I think one last thing we can do to make this look even better would be to add borders. So I'm going to add a border around this entire table, so I'll highlight the whole thing. I'll go back to the Home tab, and here is where we're going to add all our borders. So I'll click this drop down arrow, and then I'm going to click Thick Outside Border. There we go. So now we have a border around our whole table, and I think we can't see the border on the left side or on the top because our table is all the way in the corner of the page. So we can make this even better by just inserting a column to the left here. So I'm going to just select column A, right click, and then I will do insert. Now we've got a whole new column, and then I'm going to insert a row on top so we can see that top border. So I'll select the first row, right click, and then hit insert. And now our table is looking even better. And then I think I'd like to add one more border underneath the column headers by highlighting the whole range, going up to this drop down once again. And let's make this not a thick border, but just a normal border. So I'm going to hit bottom border here. And now we've got a pretty professional looking table. In order to become an advanced user of Microsoft Excel, you must master Excel's formulas. And I'm going to go over a few examples of basic formulas in this video. So what we're looking at here is Apple's stock price history for 1 year. In column A, we have the date, and in column B, we have the adjusted close price of the stock. And so, what we're going to do is find the return of this stock on every single day, and we can add that in column C. So I'll just add a third column called daily return. Hit Control B to make it bold, and I'll double click here to make the column wider. Now to find the daily return from one day to the next, and you'll notice we're skipping the 26th and the 27th because those days are weekends and there is no stock price on those days. We will do equals, and we're just going to take the simple return in this video. So I'm taking 1 day minus the previous day, and then we'll divide by the price of the previous day. And I'm going to change this to a percentage format. So we found out that on this day, the stock returned 0.5%. Now I can use the fill handle by just double clicking here, and I shot the formula all the way down to the bottom. And then I can also hold Control on my keyboard and press down arrow, and now we'll see that all the way to the bottom of our data set, we've got daily returns calculated. Now I'm going to hold Control and hit the up arrow, and now I'm back at the top of this sheet. So I want to know what is the average daily return of these simple returns. So we'll say average return, and then right underneath we're going to have to use another formula, but this one will be an inbuilt formula. And so I'm going to do equal, and I'll start typing average. So there, see average just popped up right here. I'm going to click on that. And so it's telling me I could put it in one number at a time. So I could do this and then comma and then this one, comma like that. But that would take a really long time. So what I'm going to do is actually put a range of data in there. So I'm going to select the first one, then I will hold Control, Shift, and then hit the down arrow. And now we've got all the data, and I'm going to put a parenthesis to close this formula and hit Enter. So now we see that the average return for this whole period is 0.01%. Maybe we want to build another automated formula in here that tells us whether a stock had an average positive return or its average return was negative. We could do that with the if function. So let's just say positive or negative. And then I'm going to go equals, and let's say I don't really understand the function that I'm trying to use. I can actually use this feature over here called insert function. So I'm just going to click on that, And then I'm looking for this one, if. So I'll hit that and then press OK. And now I need to perform a logical test. So this is where in this first component, we're going to want to find out if this one is positive. And so it tells us this is false, right? This cell is not positive, so it showed us false right here. So if it were true, we'd have wanted it to say that this is positive. Oops. And if it's false, we want it to tell us that it's negative. And one thing that's handy about this little functions argument box is that it tells us about the formula we're using, right? So down here is where it describes that. So it checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if it's true and another value if it's false. So if I hit OK, it just put that formula in that cell for us, and it's telling us that this value here is negative. So as we move on in this course, we're going to use a ton of Excel formulas. I just wanted to show you a very basic example here. I had the benefit of knowing exactly what formula that I needed to use in the if statement. But what if I didn't? One thing we could do is we could go to our insert function feature, and then you'll see there's a number of different things we can do with this box. So we have a box to search for a function, so type a brief description of what you want to do and then click go. That's one way I could find what I need. So I could say I want to find if a condition is met, and that gives me a number of formulas that work within those parameters, and each one gives me a description of what it is. So if I click on if, again it tells us that if is taking a logical test, and then there gives us a value of true, value of false. So it checks whether a condition is met and returns one value if true and one value if false. Another way we can search for formulas is we can select based on a category. So I'm going to hit this drop down, and there's a number of different categories: financial, date, time, math, etc. So this is a course about, financial analysis, so let's hit financial. And here's all the formulas in Excel under that category, and as you can see, there's a lot of them. So let's just see if I pick one at random. Let's say PV. So this formula is telling us it returns the present value of an investment, blah, blah, blah. So this is a very useful box to go about exploring the different formulas available in Excel and possibly finding the one that fits your purpose. Let's go over some of Excel's most commonly used functions while analyzing Apple's shared data. In this particular example, we have date in column A, and then in column B, we have the volume of Apple shares sold on each date. So what this would say is that on the 25th of March in 2022, over 80 million shares of Apple changed hands. And so if I hold here and hit Control down arrow, you'll see that this data set is about 1 year. It's 251 days, and typically there's about 252 trading days in a year. Keep that in mind, as that'll be relevant throughout the course. Okay, so now what we want to find is the total sum of all of these shares that were sold back and forth over the course of the whole year. One way we could do that is we could select the first cell here, and then we can hold Control Shift down arrow. And now we can see, and it will be small, but we can see that the total sum here is over 20 billion. It shows up in that bottom right corner down here. And it also tells us the average was 82 million, etc. But we want to find this with a formula. So we can type equals sum. And as we type, you'll see this formula bar appears. And I could just finish typing sum, or I could go grab this one with down arrow, then hit tab, and have it auto-populate the formula. Another way we could use this formula is I could click the first cell and then hold Control and click the next one and the next one and the next one. So what this would do right now is sum all four of these values. But one thing that will be easier for us right now and more efficient is if I just click the first one, hold Control Shift down, and now we have grabbed the entire range. And you'll see in Excel when there's this semicolon, that means it's grabbing that entire range. Now I will just hit enter, and you can see that we've got that 20 billion number of shares sold for the entire year. Now what we want to find is the max value. So of all of the days, which day had the max number of shares sold and what was that value. So I'm going to type equals max, hit tab, and now I'm going to grab the entire range once again and hit enter. And we can see that the highest number of shares sold on any given day was 182 million. Now let's find what was the lowest volatility day, which is the day that had the least number of shares sold. So we'll do equals min tab, and now I will once again select this entire range, enter, and so we can see 35 million shares sold was the lowest amount of shares that were ever sold on any given day. Now let's just say, out of curiosity, I'd like to count the total number of days in this range. I can do equals count, and then it's starting to populate for me, so I'll just hit tab. And now I'm going to go over and just grab this date range, Control Shift down arrow to highlight the entire range, and then hit enter. And you can see I've got 251 rows of data in this table. But what if I wanted to count only the number of days that had a volume sold of more than 100 million? How would I do that? Well, this is a variation on the count formula called COUNTIF. So we'll type equals COUNTIF, and now we'll put in our range, which is going to be B2 through B252. And then we can see with this formula that it's telling us the next thing we have to put in is criteria. So I'll hit comma. Now criteria comes up. So I could just start typing because I know how this works, or I could hit this I could hit the insert function, and it'll tell me what that means. So criteria is the condition of the form of a number, expression, or text that defines which cells will be counted. So what I want to find out is the total number of shares that have more than 100 million shares sold. So my criteria that I'm going to put right here is greater than 100 million. And then I'll hit OK. And that tells me that of the 251 days, only 42 of them have more than 100 million shares sold. Every day when I'm using Excel, I need to fix cell references within my formulas many times. So let's go over this important concept in this video. So we're going to assume that we're a company that sells 5 items A, B, C, and so forth, and that the prices of these items are listed in column C. So item A typically sells for $10 each, and item B sells for $15, etc. So now we've got a quantity that we've sold in week 1 versus week 2. So we sold 5 units of item A in week 1, and we sold 6 units of item A in week 2. Now we want to find out how much revenue did we make off of every item in both of these 2 weeks. So the first thing we can do is calculate what we made off of item A in week 1, which will be simple. It will just be the price multiplied by the number that we sold that week. And now I'll hit enter. And so I want to paste this formula over this whole range. So I want to set it up so I can just paste it that way. And so let's do that. So if I paste it this, so I hit Control C. Now if I paste it downwards, this should work. So I'll hit Control V. And that is correct, right? 3 times 15 is 45. 20 times 40, or sorry, 2 times 20 is 40, etc. Now if I paste this formula over into week 2, we'll see that we get 30. But I should get 6 times 10, which should be 60. So what happened there? Well, I didn't lock in or fix the reference in column C. So what we started with was we started with a formula that referenced C4 and D4. And then when we pasted that formula the column over, it moved both from D4 times E4. But what we really need is C4 times E4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a $sign in front of the C to make sure that the column does not move for that cell. I'll hit enter, and then I'll paste this formula right here. And so now we can see that's the correct value of 60. And now I can take this, hit Control C, and I can just paste it over this whole range here. And now we see that we've got the correct value for each of these. And now let's sum up the totals. So equals sum. So we want to find out what's the total amount of money that or revenue we made in week 1. We'll hit enter. So that's 280. And then let's just use the fill handle to slide this over here. And we see that we made $445 of revenue in week 2. Now let's imagine that we want to find what is the total percentage of the revenue that we made off of every single one of these items. So what I could do is I could say equals, and then I'll put a parenthesis. So I'll do F4 plus G4. So that should give me the total amount of revenue I made for item A, which would be $110. And then I will divide it by the sum of these two values here, right? Because that's the total amount of revenue of all of the items. And that gives me the correct value. So 15.2% of my total revenue was made by item A. Now, if I drag this formula down, we're going to see an error, a divide by 0 error. And that's because as we drag down, the numerator is correct. So we do want to know F5 plus G5 as the numerator for item B. But the problem is now we're dividing by 0 because we did not fix the cell references for the denominator, which is the total value. So I can go back up here and I'm going to hit F4 on my keyboard to lock in place that cell. And if I hit it one more time, because all I really need is to lock in the row 9. I don't need to lock in the column. So I'll hit F4 again. And now all I've done is lock in the row. And I can do the same thing over here. F4, F4. So now I have locked in the denominator and that total value. And I'll hit enter. Now if I paste this formula down one more time, now we can see that we've correctly calculated the percentage of the revenue for each of these items using fixed cell references. In this video, we're looking at the sales of a hypothetical company that operates in 4 different regions, and the regions can be described in this table in column B, north, south, east, and west. This company only sells 2 products, so product A and product B. But they sell both of these 2 products in each of their 4 regions. And then you can see in column D, we have the sales of each product within each region. And so what we want to do is fill out this table using Excel's inbuilt formulas SUMIF and SUMIFS. So let's start off with the East region. How would we go about calculating what is the total value of all of the sales in the East region? Well, because the East region is just one condition, we can use SUMIF. So we'll type equals SUMIF. And then we need to select our range. So this is actually the criteria range. So we can grab this whole range here from B3 to B10 and hit F4. So by hitting F4, we have just locked in this whole range. And you'll see a dollar value appears before the column header and before the row number. And so this tells us that when we drag this formula or copy and paste it to a different cell, this range will not move. And this is very important. So now let's hit comma, and for the criteria, we'll put in the region, which is East. Notice how I'm not locking in this, because when we copy and paste this formula down to the other regions, it's important that this cell range move as we paste that formula. So we'll hit comma, and now we need to find the sum range, which is just this value of the sales in column D. So we'll highlight all of that and hit F4. Now enter. So this is telling us that in the East, we have sold 1,500, let's say, different items. And so we can confirm this by highlighting these 2 cells, and we see down at the bottom here that it says sum 1,500. Okay, and we can just copy and paste this formula to all of these different regions. So I'm going to hit Control C. Then I'm going to paste by right-clicking and hitting formula. Or I could just select here and I could hit Control V and Control V once again. Okay, and so now we want to know within each of these regions, what is the total value that's in product A versus product B? Well, this is adding a separate condition because we're saying Find the sales based on not only the region, but also the product. That's when we need to use SUMIFS. We'll say equals SUMIFS. So it's asking for the sum range initially, which is going to be that range of sales in column D. We'll hit F4 to lock it in place. Now it's asking for criteria range 1. We can start with the region range, so we'll grab all that, and once again hit F4 to lock it in place, comma. And now this is criteria 1, which is the actual region in question. So for this one, it will be the East. And I'm not going to lock this cell in place because we need that cell to shift as we paste the formula into different areas. So we'll hit comma. And now we need criteria range 2, which is the product range. So I'll select all of that, hit F4 to lock it in place. And now we'll go find criteria 2, which is this actual product A. And then now I will close this formula, and we find that there is 600 of sales within product A in the East, which is this value here, so we know that's correct. And now we can actually copy this formula and paste it. But you're going to notice one thing. We have 0. And why is that? It's because we didn't lock in place the region, but now that dropped down one cell. So we're going to have to drag this one back up and hit enter. And now we see that product B has 900. And so we can see that these sum to a total of 1500, and we've got the correct value. So now I can highlight both of these cells and hit Control C to copy. And then I'll just come here, paste with Control V, and then I'll paste here, Control V, Control V. And so now we've found the number of product A and product B sold in each of these regions. And we can calculate our grand total by just using equals sum. I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard, and I'm just going to select each of the region values and hit enter for a grand total of sales of 4,550. Let's dive right into the topic of how to sort data in Excel. There's a few easy ways to do that, and I'm going to show you how. Let's look at the table we're working with first. So we've got an investor ID in column B, and then we can see that it's already sorted from 1 to 8. And then we've also got investor name, we've got the company name, the investment amount, and the investment date. So let's say that we wanted to sort by the date in which this person invested with us rather than their ID number. Well, the easiest way to do this is to just select any cell in that column, then go up to sort and filter here in the home tab, and then select sort oldest to newest. And we can see that all of the data in this table shifted, which is important. So we can see Sarah Johnson, who was investor number 4, was the one who invested with us on the earliest date. Now I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. So now we're back to our original state, which was sorting by the investor ID number. I'm going to show you the wrong way to sort data. So let's say we highlighted this entire column, and then we went up here and we hit the same thing, sort oldest to newest. We'll see a sort warning pops up, which is basically asking us, do we want to expand our sort, the selection of our sort to this entire table? Or do we want to just continue with the current selection, which is just column F? So if we hit continue with the current selection, you'll see that only the values in column F change. None of the other columns change. So I'll hit sort. And so now you can see just these ones shifted, which means now our data is inaccurate because Sarah Johnson did not invest with us on 315. She actually invested with us on 110. So I'm going to undo that by hitting Control Z. And now I'll just show you what you'd really have to do is go up and hit sort oldest to newest, and then leave it defaulted on the default selection, expand the selection and hit sort. And now the entire table is properly sorted and Sarah Johnson is at the top as she should be. And now I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that to go back to the original state. Now, my favorite way to sort data in Excel is just to select the whole table, hit sort and filter, and then go to custom sort. So this really breaks everything out clearly. So let's say we wanted to sort by the investment amount. So we'll select investment amount, we'll sort on cell values, and then let's just say we wanted to sort by the smallest to largest. So we want to find out who's our smallest investor, and then at the bottom we want to see our largest investor. We'll hit OK. And so we see this Emily Johnson has only invested $5,000 with us, or Emily Wilson, whereas Sarah Johnson has invested $20,000 with us. And those are just some of the basics of sorting in Excel. Filtering data allows you to analyze and manipulate large sets of data extremely quickly and efficiently in Excel. Let's start with a smaller data set just as an example, but later on in the course, we can use this feature on larger data sets. So to apply the filter in the first place, I'm just going to select the whole table, and then I'm going to go up to Sort and Filter and hit Filter. And so you can see that on each of the columns in the table, these little drop-down arrows appeared. Now, let's say hypothetically, I wanted to filter this data set to find all of the investors that worked for Tech Corp and HealthX. So I can go into this filter by hitting the drop-down arrow, and then I can hit select all to uncheck everything that's currently checked. And then I want to find out HealthX employees, and I want to find out who are our Tech Corp employees. So I'll check both those boxes and hit OK. And then we can see the 4 employees that work for these 2 companies right here. Now, if I want to see the whole table again, I can just go back to that drop-down arrow and I'll just hit Select All. Now, another way that I can filter this data is based on the investment amount. So I'm going to go up, hit the drop-down arrow on this column, and then I'm going to go to Number Filters. And let's say hypothetically, I only want to see who invested money with us that invested more than $10,000. So I will go to greater than, and where it says is greater than, I will type $10,000 and hit OK. And now we can see that there's only 4 investors that actually invested more than $10,000 with us. Now I'm going to undo this by just hitting the drop down arrow once again and hitting select all and then OK. And now one of the last ways that we can sort data is based on the actual dates. So I'm going to hit the drop down arrow on the investment date column. And then let's say hypothetically, I'm only interested in finding out who invested with us in January. So I'm going to hit 2022, which unchecks all the boxes. Then I'll select January and hit OK. And now we can see there's 2 investors that actually invested with us in January. Although we have this pretty nice looking table on our screen already, this is not yet officially recognized by Excel as a table. I'm going to show you how to make sure that Excel knows what this table is and give it a name inside of Excel. So we're just going to select any cell within inside this table, and then on the Home tab, we're going to go to Format as Table, and then we can select any of these. I'll just choose this one. So this is the format we're going to give it. And then once we click that, this box comes up that says Create Table, and it auto fills this table range. So you want to make sure that it gave you the right range, which for us it did, and we can see that it's outlined with this little green dotted line that's moving around it. And it also has a box to check that says my table has headers. Ours has these headers here, so we will leave that box checked and hit OK. So now Excel is officially recognizing this as a table. And we can actually change the name of this table by going to here where it says table name in the table design tab, and we'll just change it to investors. And I'll hit enter. So now this table actually has a name inside of Excel, and we can tell that by going to the name box and hitting the drop down arrow and selecting investors. And now we can see that this entire range of information is actually selected. So Excel knows what this table is. Another interesting thing where we'll see this table name appear is when we use formulas based on the data of this table. So if I go down here and hit equals sum, and then let's just say I want to find out the total investment amount of all my investors, I could just select this whole range. And then you see once I selected it, Excel actually auto-populated this. It's saying the investors table and then the investment amount column. So it's auto-filling that for us. Then I'll hit enter. So it tells us that our 8 investors have actually invested a total of $90,000. And now that we have this data in an official Excel table, there's a couple unique features that we can use on it. So you'll see that there is no tab right here, but if I select a cell within the table, this table design tab appears. So I'll click in here, And then, like, here's an example of something interesting that we could do with this. So let's hit insert slicer. So, and then let's hit it on company name. So I'll check the company name box and hit OK. So now this slicer comes up. All of these are highlighted this dark blue, meaning we're selecting all of them. But let's say I just hit HealthX. So now we're only selecting the 2 HealthX companies, or we can change it to smart cars, and now the only row showing is that smart cars row, or I can hold control on my keyboard and select Tech Corp, and now we're showing all of the investors from both smart cars and Tech Corp. Let's create some professional looking charts in Excel. And we're starting off with some data here called fake stock returns. And we have our stock returns by year in column B, and then we have 3 different asset classes: small cap stocks, large cap stocks, and bonds. And we have a return for each of those. How might we go about creating a chart in Excel that will plot all of these returns in such a way that we can compare how each asset class did amongst the other asset classes? Well, a good place to start, if we're not sure, is to use one of Excel's inbuilt features. So if we click on Insert, and then we go to Charts, we can select our data here and click Recommended Charts. And now Excel's going to recommend at the very top here the line chart, which I agree with. I think this is good data to be used for a line chart. But if I didn't want to go with their suggestions, I could go to all charts and pick from any of these options. There's many different charts you can create in Excel. But I'll just go back here and I'll stick with the line chart and hit OK. And this is actually really nice looking already. So Excel populated this line chart, and it gave us our horizontal and vertical axis. It gave us a legend, and it also gave us a chart title. It's kind of hard to read because the font's a little bit small, so I think I'll select the whole thing and hit Control B to bold everything on it. And then I will just increase the font size of everything by hitting this font size on the home page here. And now we can read everything on this chart quite a bit better. But if I had wanted to only change the font size of, let's say, this title and nothing else, I could have just selected that, and I could have increased or decreased the font size without having any of the other text highlighted. Now I think I'd like the chart title to say fake stock return. So I will just delete that text there and change it to fake stock returns. There's a few other things I'd like to show you on this graph. So we could change the data. Let's say we wanted to get rid of bonds. We could right click here. We could go to select data. And now this is showing us the whole range of our data. So it's saying that we've highlighted B3 to E15, which is this range here. And we've got 3 different series within this chart. So we have small cap stocks, large cap stocks, and bonds. If we uncheck this, we can get rid of bonds. So let's just do that and hit OK. So now we're just looking at small cap stocks and large cap stocks. So I'll right click this again to select data, and we'll get the bonds back in there. And let's say we weren't interested in having a few of these years. We could just select, we could get rid of 2010, 2012, 2011, there we go. And now this is starting to look like a pretty different chart. There's a lot of different ways that we could manipulate this as well. So one thing I'd like to show you is if we go to chart design, we can go into add chart element. And let's say, for example, we were interested in adding data labels. So we can go here, and then let's say we wanted to add data labels to the left. There we go. So they're kind of overlapping each other at some points there. Maybe I'll see how it looks to the right. That looks very similar, and we could try above. And so data labels can be complicated because of how they tend to overlap. So one thing we could do is just, let's say we click above, and then where 10 and 11 is here, I can just manually take that 10 and move it a little bit further down so that it's distinct that that belongs with the small cap stocks and that the 11% belongs with the large cap stocks. One way that we could change the appearance of this graph is to actually use the inbuilt Excel chart styles. So if I go and just select the graph, go to chart design, you'll see this box that says chart styles, and we can just pick from there. So you'll see that there's these interesting different styles that Excel has within it that you can use if you don't want to do your own formatting. let's go back to what we originally had. And so I just added these data labels to show you how to do that, but I actually think they make the graph look a little bit worse. So I'm going to get rid of them. So I'll just click the graph, and then I'll go to add chart element, and then where it says data labels, I'll click none. Another way I could get rid of them is where this you see this plus box, I could just hit that, and where it says data labels, I could uncheck this. So there's a ton of different ways to do the same thing when it comes to charts in Excel. Now, let's pretend we wanted to make a similar style of a graph, but we wanted to do it from scratch without Excel doing all the work with the recommended charts, etc. So the first thing we can do is go to Insert, and where it says Charts, we'll go find our line chart. And so we'll hit that arrow, and now there's a few different options. So this would just be a typical line chart. This one has line with markers. Let's pick line with markers. So now we've got this very blank chart. I think I'd like to give it some border. So let's click Format, go to Shape Outline. There's a lot of different options, so we could pick some shape styles, which is some of the Excel inbuilt ones, but I think we'll make our own. So let's give it a weight of 3, and now we can see that there's this gray border around it, but I'm not feeling the gray border. Let's make it a black border. So I'll just hit Automatic. So now we have this nice border, but let's add some data to it. So I'm going to right click, and I'll hit select data like we did before. And now we're going to have to add a series. Let's just start with small cap stocks. So in the series name here in this box, I could just type, small cap stocks, but why? That would take too long. When I can just click that cell, and now we have small cap stocks as the series name. But let's add series values by just selecting this entire range and hit OK. So that's looking pretty good. It gave a title automatically to the chart called Small Cap Stocks. And it gave us our returns, but one thing I don't like is that it just says 1, 2, 3, 4 on the horizontal axis. So let's add horizontal axis labels. So we'll hit Edit here. And in the axis label range, we'll grab these range of years here and hit OK. So now we've got our years, and that's starting to look a little better. But I think I'd like to see how did the small cap stocks do versus the large cap stocks. So let's hit edit. Oh, not edit. We'll hit add. So we're going to add a new one. We don't want to change the old one. So we're adding a new one. Now we'll grab the series name as large cap stocks. And for the series values, we'll grab this range of data and hit OK. And now this is starting to look pretty good. I think the text is a bit small, hard to read. So I'm going to do Control B to make it bold. And then I'm just going to increase the font size again. And one thing I can't tell right now is which line is for small cap stocks and which is for large cap stocks. So we're going to have to add a legend. And we can do that by hitting this plus sign. So we'll go to legend and check that box. So we added a legend, but now I feel like our data is a bit more scrunched together and the years are really close to one another. So I think I'd like to move the legend. So I'm going to hit this right arrow here and move the legend to the bottom. Oh yeah, that actually is now looking much better. And one other thing I'd like to do is add a label to the axis, because someone who's looking at our chart, they might not necessarily know what this 10%, 15% means. Right? So one thing we can do is we can go to the axis titles here and check that. But I don't think we need a title for the years. I think most people will just figure out that these are years. So I'll go to axis titles and hit this. I'm going to uncheck primary horizontal because we don't really need that one. But we could change this one now to stock returns. So this one is starting to look pretty good. I think our audience can tell what's going on. And maybe we'll just throw a chart title on there to finish it off. And actually, well, let's get rid of it. We were able to somewhat master the way to plot our stock returns over time in that line chart. But what if we were just looking at a static view of our portfolio? That is to say, we're looking at how much of our portfolio is allocated to stocks, bonds, real estate, etc. Well, a good chart for that might be a pie chart to see how it breaks out. In fact, when you're looking at percentages that add up to 100 and where they break out, I often like to use pie charts. So I'm going to select that whole range and then go to Insert. And now we can find pie chart here. And then let's insert a 3D pie chart. So we can see a 3D pie chart looks like that, whereas a 2D pie chart is flat. So I think the 3D looks a little bit better. So I'm going to click on that. And let's make it a bit bigger. And you'll see when you insert charts like this in Excel, the font is always pretty small and hard to read. Like if I was presenting this in front of people, they'd barely be able to read this. So I almost always start off just hitting Control B to bold everything, and then going home and just increasing the font size. I mean, I just don't understand why the default is so small. And one thing that if I was a viewer of this graph, I would like to know, what is the breakout percentage? I can tell it's almost mostly all in stocks and more in bonds, but I don't know the exact number. So one thing that I could do is I could click on this and I could add data labels here. So check that box. And that's looking good, but one thing I don't necessarily like about that is that the text is black and that blue, it might be hard for some people to read. So one thing that I could do is select that, and I could go up here and you'll see one thing. So I could change this font to white, which would make it pop on the graph. But the problem with that is now I can't read this one. So I'm going to go back, make it black again, but then I can make the actual border behind it white, and then we can actually read it. So let's click here, and then let's change it to white. And now I think that that is looking pretty decently. If we don't want it to be so that this one's in a white box and this one's in a white box, but these aren't, we can just grab these and drag them outside. And now we'll have a little bit more of a uniform looking graph that's starting to look pretty nice. And so we've only gone over 2 of the types of charts in this video, but as you can see, there's a ton of them. It's definitely worth playing around and learning more about them. There's a lot you can do in data visualization in Excel. In this video, we'll be determining whether 6 applicants are creditworthy enough to receive a loan from our fictional bank, and we'll be basing that decision on a few conditions. The first one being their credit score. We want to find out whether these applicants have good credit, and we'll decide that based on their credit score of whether it's 700 or less. And so what we're going to have to do is type equals if, and so first this function is asking for a logical test. Basically, we have to put something in there that either determines true or false. So we'll say if their credit score is greater than 700, comma, and now that we put the comma, we're in the next part of this function, which is the value if true. So if this is true, we'll say, yes, they have good credit. However, now we're in the part that says value if false. So if they are below 700, then we're going to say, no, they do not have good credit. And we'll close that formula and hit enter. And then I'll just copy it and we'll paste it through the rest of these values. And we can see that 3 of our applicants have good credit because their credits exceed 700, whereas the rest do not have good credit. Now that we know whether these 6 candidates have good or bad credit, we need to decide whether we're going to approve or deny their loan. And we can do that with an if function as well. So we'll say equals if. But there's one more piece to this puzzle that we want to know about right now. We want to say if they have good credit, or they're a full-time employee, then we will approve their loan. We're a very generous fake bank. And so in the logical test, we'll start off writing or. And so now it's asking us for logical 1, logical 2, etc. So for the first logical test, we'll say whether their employment status equals full-time, and make sure to put it in quotation marks because it is text. And then we'll do comma, and now it's logical 2. And so here we'll say if the credit is equal to yes, so yes, they have good credit, then that will be true. If either of these happen, then it's true. So now value if true, we'll say that they are approved. But value if false, so if neither of these things are true, then we'll say denied. I'll copy that with Control C and I'll paste it over the rest. So we can see with just these parameters, we have approved 3 applicants and denied another 3. And so this applicant here has both a good credit score and is full-time. This one also has good credit score and is full-time. Whereas this one has good credit score and is part-time. But because we said or, we're still going to approve them because only one of them needed to be true. However, we are a more sophisticated bank than that. We make our decisions based on more conditions than just these two. Another thing we want to look at before we decide whether we deny an applicant is we want to look at their loan amount, and we want to combine it with the credit score. So after we look at these two conditions, we want to see if their credit score is both over 650 and their loan amount is less than 12,000, we want to approve them. So instead of writing denied right here, we can put another if function in there. And this is called a nested if function, an if function within another if function. So now we'll look into our new logical test, and this will be based on the AND formula. And as we wrote the OR before, either one of the conditions in that function needed to be true. But with AND, all of the conditions within the AND function must be true for it to return a value of true. And so first thing we'll look for is the credit score, and whether it exceeds 650. Next, for logical 2, we're going to look at the loan amount and whether it is below 12,000. And then if both of those conditions are met, we will say that the loan is approved. Otherwise, we will finally conclude that their application is denied, and I'll hit enter. And now keep in mind, before we change the formulas at all, we had 3 loans that were approved. Now let's see what happens when I paste the formula over the remaining rows. Now we have 4. This is the one that changed. So the person was not full-time and they did not have good credit, so they did not satisfy the initial logical test. So then they jumped into this part of the if function, and then we looked at whether their credit score was over 650. That returned true. We looked at whether their loan amount was below 12,000. That returned true. And so finally, they were approved. However, we could look at applicant 2 as an example of one that just missed the mark. So they didn't pass the first 2, but then we went over here. We found their credit score was over 680. However, their loan amount was not below 12,000, so they were ultimately denied. In this video, we're going to be going over one of my most frequently used formulas that I've used throughout my career, and that is VLOOKUP, which conveniently allows you to retrieve data based on a vertical column. And so I want to propose this question to you. If for each of these stocks right here, if I wanted to pull in their price from this table, how would I do that? And a good solution could be VLOOKUP. So let's just start off with that. So equals VLOOKUP. Now we need to put in our lookup value, which is just going to be the ticker that we're interested in. And I'm going to hit F4 3 times to make sure that we lock into column G. Now, comma. Now next we're going to put in our table array. And there's 2 ways that we can do this. We can either grab it like this, or we can just grab the columns. Either one would work the exact same way. I'll just grab the tables to keep it simplified. And now the reason that we started with column B is because the lookup value needs to be in the leftmost column of the table. So our lookup value Google is in this leftmost value, so this works perfectly. Now we're going to put in the column index number. And this is important because it's telling us the number of places from the leftmost column that the column that we're interested in retrieving is. So for example, for this formula, we want price, which is the 3rd column in the table, right? Ticker's number 1, company's number 2, price is number 3, and dividend is number 4. So we can hit number 3. And then finally, we're putting in our range lookup, which is either approximate match or exact match. So to be honest, in my career, I've almost never experienced a time where you need to use approximate match. Basically, approximate match would say, let's say instead of having GOOGL, we just had GOOG. And then what this formula would do is if we did an approximate match is go in here and find the value that's the closest one to it and hopefully retrieve this row. But it doesn't always work. And if your data is that flawed, you've got bigger problems that you shouldn't be using VLOOKUP in the first place, in my opinion. So typically, I've always just stuck to exact match, which will be false. Or what you can do is false is the same as 0. So we can just type 0 and hit enter. And now we've got Google's price. I'm just going to drag this formula to the right. And so you'll see it didn't change. But we want to bring in dividends. And because dividends is the fourth column, not the third, we just have to go up here, change the column index number to 4. And then now we've pulled in Google's price and its dividend. And now if we drag both these formulas down, we'll get the price and dividend for all 4 stocks. Thank you. Let's talk about VLOOKUP's lesser-known sibling, HLOOKUP. And to be honest, in my career, I have not found that many cases where I've had to use this formula because data is usually formatted vertically rather than horizontally in most cases that I've seen. But let's just run through this anyways. So what we're going to be wanting to do is pull in the price and dividend for each of these stocks from this table above. And we'll use the HLOOKUP formula. So we'll type equals HLOOKUP. And so the first thing we're looking up is our lookup value, which is just the ticker listed here. And I will hit F4 3 times so that we can lock in column B here. And now we're going to grab our table array. And so I'm just going to grab this entire table like that. And once again, I'll hit F4 to lock in that entire array. We do not want it moving as we drag our formulas. Now for row index, because I'm in this price column, and we see that price is the 1, 2, 3. So the third row in this table, we'll put in number 3. And then for range lookup, this is asking for an approximate match versus an exact match. And I'll be honest, I very rarely in my career have had cases where I need to use an approximate match. So basically what's that saying is if, let's say here I had GOOG, and then up here it was GOOGL, so it was close but not exact. I could use approximate match to find the closest comparable value. But your data is going to be deeply flawed if you're needing to use that. So you'd probably want to address your data issues first. So let's just go with exact match, which we can either type false for exact match or 0. 0 and false are the same thing in this case. So let's hit enter. And there, we have our Google stock price right here, 1950. Let's drag the formula to the right. But one thing you'll notice is that the value doesn't change at all. It's the same value. And that's because now we're going to be looking for row number 4 because dividend is row number 4, whereas price was row number 3. So let's change our row index to 4 and hit enter. And now we pulled in Google's dividend of 175. And then now we can just drag down both of these formulas and we have got our prices and dividends for all 4 stocks. Thank you. Old school Excel users like myself have always used VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP to retrieve data, but now there's a new kid in town. It's called XLOOKUP and it combines both of their functions into one and even adds some new and improved features. So let's go over an example real quick. So this right here is a VLOOKUP formula where I'm using VLOOKUP to pull in Google's price from this table based on the ticker. So it's going to look in column B and then it's going to retrieve the price. And then here, we're doing the same thing, but we're returning dividend. But we could use XLOOKUP instead of that. And so one thing I want to show you about VLOOKUP really quick is, what if we reversed where the ticker column was and let's say the company or the price column? So let's insert a column here. And then let's just move this over here. I know it's going to make our table look ugly, but let's just do that. See now, all of the formulas actually break because ticker is to the right of price, which is not something that VLOOKUP can handle. Also, it broke because we have a finite column index. So I'll just undo this. And now let's show what happens if we use XLOOKUP instead and then do the same thing. So instead of VLOOKUP, we're going to type XLOOKUP. And we're going to look up Google right here. So that's our lookup value. And I'll drag this down here. And I'm going to hit F4 3 times to lock in column G. Then we'll hit comma. Now it's asking for a lookup array, which is just going to be based on the ticker here. So let's grab that whole array. And I'm going to hit F4 to lock that in place, comma. And now it wants to know our return array. And because we're interested in price, I'm going to grab the whole price column. And then I'm going to hit F4 once, twice to lock in the row number. We want the column to be able to move. And then finally, it's asking if not found. Let's just for now say missing. Okay, so if we don't find anything, we want it to say missing, and then let's hit enter. So it pulled in the same price, and now let's do the same thing for the dividend. So we got the right dividend, and let's drag down for both of these. And so we've got all the same values that VLOOKUP got us. Now let's just do one thing. So let's do the same thing as before. Let's insert a column and let's drag this one over. And see, our formula didn't break at all because now our lookup array and our return array are based on those actual arrays that can move and not some defined number like 3. Another thing that's interesting is let's change this Google let's get rid of the L. Now it's going to tell us missing for both of these because we define that if not found parameter is missing. Another interesting thing that we can do is let's say we do comma, and then instead of exact match, which was the default, we say exact match or next larger item. So we'll put a 1 right here. So let's just type 1 and see if it gets the right dividend. And there we go. It pulled in a dividend of 175 for Google. And we can do the same thing for price. We'll put in a 1 right there. And it pulled in the correct price again. So it's a little bit more sophisticated than VLOOKUP. But how does it work if we compare it to HLOOKUP? Here, we are looking at the same data that we saw before, this table, but we've got it horizontally like this rather than vertical. And that's why here we used HLOOKUP to pull in the values. So I pulled in the price based on the ticker here, and we put in row 3 to grab the row number 3, which is the price. And the problem with this is a similar problem as VLOOKUP, whereas if we shifted around the columns at all, then this whole thing would break. And I'm just going to trust that you guys remember from the first example that that's how it worked. So let's do equals XLOOKUP to see how we could replace our HLOOKUP with XLOOKUP. So we're going to type in our lookup value once again, and I'll hit F4 3 times to lock in that column B, then comma. Once again, our lookup array. So this time we're going to be using a row the whole time instead of a column like we did with the vertical XLOOKUP. And I'll hit F4 to lock that in place. And now it wants the return array, so we'll just grab all of that, hit F4 to lock it in place. And then we have if not found, we can just type missing like we did the last time. And let's just say for the match mode, we're going to use exact match, which means all of them have to match exactly. So we'll type 0 for exact match, and then I will hit enter. And that should work for all the prices. But if I drag it over, it's going to give us the price instead of the dividend. So one thing we have to do is click in here and drag this formula down one row and hit enter. And now we've got the correct dividend. There we go. Well, let's see what happens if I change the NFL X, so the Netflix, to NFL. Any football fans? There we go. And now we see missing. But we can do the same thing that we did on the last screen, where instead of using 0 exact match, we do 1, which is basically an approximate match. So it finds the exact match or the next larger item, hit enter, and now we've got Netflix price of $5.10, and we can do the same thing here to get in the dividend of 0. And so looks like XLOOKUP could be the VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP killer that you could use in your spreadsheets to improve their functionality. Thank you. So what we have here is a table of stock or index prices. So on the top, we've got our stocks and index listed as column headers. And then over here on the left side, we have our months listed as row headers. And so what we're wanting to do is pull in the price of a stock or index based on a month. So for example, right here, we want to know what is the price of stock C in February of 2023. So our formula should pull in a value of 340, and we should be able to just paste the formula down for all of these 5 combinations and have it pull in the right value. And a formula we can use to do that is index combined with match. And so I'm going to show you with it broken out how we can start. So let's say we wanted to find what row number this month is in. We can type equals match. And then our lookup value is the month because the months are the row headers. And then we'll just hit comma. And then our lookup array will be this list of rows or this list of months. And then we'll hit F4 to lock that in place. And then comma. And we're going to use an exact match type because we want to make sure that this month matches a month in here exactly. Close that and hit enter. So we find that February is actually the second month in this list of months. If we drag this formula down, we'll see that each month is accurate. Now we can find the column number, which is going to be based on the security. So for stock C, that should be the third column in this range of columns. So we'll type equals match. We'll grab the stock C lookup value, comma, here's our lookup array. We'll hit F4 to lock it in place, comma, and then our match type once again will be exact, so 0, enter. And then we'll just drag this down. And now to actually pull in the price, we're going to have to pull in with the index formula. So we'll type index. Now our array that it's asking for is just the array of all the stock prices. And so we'll hit F4 to lock that in place. Now our row number is just what we calculated here, and our column number is what we calculated here. And so now we will just close that formula and drag down. And so you can see we've pulled in all of the correct prices. For example, index X in March of 23 has a price of $13.50. And so now if we wanted to do this all in one formula, which is typically how I do it when I'm at work, we can just write it all in one. I'll just copy that out of there. And instead of directly referencing this cell, K3, I will just put the match function directly in there. And then we'll do the same thing for column number. And then when you're actually writing these formulas, you'll just write it out in one long formula that'll look something like this, and it'll retrieve the exact data that you need. So now if I hit enter and drag the formula down, nothing changes. Thank you. Let's walk through two examples of array functions. The first will be how do you use it for calculations, and the second will be how do we use it to calculate data. So what we're looking at here is just a table of stocks, and we have a certain number of shares of each one, and then we also have a price per share of each one. And what we want to come up with is our total value of each position, and then a total value for the entire portfolio. So if I want to do this by only typing one formula in one single cell, I can do this using an array formula. So I can type equals, and then I will highlight this whole array, and multiply it by this whole array. Now, if you have a version of Excel from 2021 or later, or I should say from 2021 to the present day, or Office 365, you can just hit enter to execute this formula. Whereas if you have an older version of Excel, you're going to need to hit Control Shift Enter all at the same time. So now do whichever one applies to you. And now you'll see that this formula just spilled out into all these other cells, even though we only typed it in one single cell. You can see it's also highlighted by this light blue line around it. So we know we executed this array formula properly. A couple advantages of the array formula is that it's actually more efficient, and this helps for huge spreadsheets with large amounts of data and a lot of calculations that can get slowed down because it's just using one formula instead of, say, 12 formulas for this example. And it also helps if our data is shifting as it dynamically updates. And so one thing that's also interesting about this is that you can't change just a single cell or it'll break the formula. For example, let's say I wanted to just change this one formula and I said this was actually equal to 50. You'll see it breaks this entire range and we get this error here. So if we want to change the whole formula, we can, but we have to highlight the whole range. Let's say we change this from 14 to 12. You'll see it still works, but it's going to stop here. So it just stopped before it got to the bottom two. Now I'll hit Control Z to undo that. And now another cool thing is the syntax around this. So if I want to find the total value of the whole portfolio, I can just equal sum. And then you'll see when I highlight this, and you see how I'm highlighting this whole range and it says E3 to E8. Now if I grab the whole thing, it'll say E3 pound. So that's how we know that this is an array. Hit enter and it gives us the total value for our portfolio. Let's look at how we can use array functions to dynamically filter data. Now what we have here is just a table with two columns. We've got 20 stocks listed by their tickers, and then we've got the asset classes for each of them. And what would we do if we wanted to find out the unique values in this range here? Well, we could use an inbuilt Excel range function called unique. And then all we're going to do is put in the first argument, the array argument, which is just this array. So we'll just highlight that entire array. And then we will, if you have the older version of Excel, like I said before, you'll hit Control Shift Enter. If you have the newer one, you can just hit Enter. And so we see there's only three different values in this array: stocks, bonds, and commodities. Now what we can do is create a drop-down list based on those values dynamically that would update if more asset classes were added or some were taken out. So we're going to go to data, data validation, and then we'll go to list, and then in the source, we'll just click this cell here, and then we will put in the pound sign once again, as we saw previously. That's the syntax for these array functions, and we'll hit OK. And now we'll see all three values right here. And then if we want to create a way that we can filter out all the tickers based on that list, we'll just do equal to filter. And then for the array, we're going to put in all of these tickers here. And then for include, so we'll do comma, and then for include, we'll just select this array function, and then we will set it equal to there, and hit enter or control shift enter based on whichever version of Excel you have. And then now let's select a value from here, stocks. So we see all the stocks from that list right there. Now we can change it to either bonds or commodities, and it dynamically updates in length as we change that list. Thank you for watching. Let's dive into a handy Excel feature known as conditional formatting. What we're looking at here is just some fake stock names with some fake daily returns and some fake dates that the last dividend was paid. If I wanted to have a quick view of which of these had a positive return or a negative return in the last day, how could I do that? Well, the easiest way that I'm aware of is I could select this entire range, then go up and in the Home tab, go over to Conditional Formatting, and then I can go to Highlight Cells Rules, and first I'll go to Greater Than. And so now it gives me this option immediately, which is to format cells that are greater than 0.57% as light red fill with dark red text. And I believe it came up with that 0.57% so that it would make roughly half of them higher and roughly half of them lower. But I'm more interested in 0%. I want to know which ones made me money and which ones didn't. So the ones that are greater than 0, I would think should be green actually. So I'm going to select green fill with dark green text and hit OK. And then now we can see which ones we've made money on immediately. And then let's just say we want to make the ones that we lost money on red. So let's hit conditional formatting again, highlight cells rules, less than. And now let's once again change this to 0. And then let's stick with light red fill with dark red text. But you can see there's a lot of other options. Like we could just do red text, or we could do a red border, for example. But I like the light red fill with dark red text and hit OK. So that gives us a good view immediately of all of the different potential returns we had. But what if we wanted to see scales between if one was more significant than another? For example, this return right here is almost 3%, but this one is basically 0%. But the way I'm seeing it, they look the same color. If I wanted to distinguish between that, I could highlight this entire range, go up to conditional formatting, and then I could go to color scales here. And if I select the first one, you can see that the largest gains are the most green, and then the ones that are in the middle are closer to yellow and orange, and then finally the largest losses are actually the most red. Another thing we could do is go to data bars here, and if we select this one, it will show us proportionally which ones had the highest gains. As you can see, this box right here on this 2.78% is very high, but the one for 3.21% is the largest of all. See, that box is maxed out. And then we can see immediately that this day here with the negative 2.08% is the largest loss because this red box goes all the way to the left. So those are some useful ways to view this data. Another interesting feature is that we can look at the last dividend paid date here. And let's say we want to see immediately which ones have been paid in the last month. Well, I can just highlight all of these. I can go to conditional formatting, and then I can go to highlight cell rules, and I can go over here to a date occurring. And then I have all these options: yesterday, today, tomorrow, etc. I'm going to select last month. So I can see immediately within the last month that these 3 dividends were paid out. And maybe I just want to make this one a yellow fill with dark yellow text and hit OK. And so that is some useful information. Another thing that I can do that would be pretty useful is I can find out if there are any duplicate values in this table. So I can do this by basically looking at stock names, and I'll highlight all of those, and I'll go back to conditional formatting. And then I'm going to go to highlight cell rules, and then I'm going to look for duplicate values. And you can see that it immediately highlighted these 2 rows here. So I've actually found out that I've accidentally got 2 duplicate rows, which is going to be not useful. So I'll delete one of those rows immediately. And then another thing that we can do with conditional formatting is we can do custom rules. So let's say I select all of these right here. I'll go to conditional formatting. And then first, before I do anything else, I'm just going to clear these rules, and I'll clear the rules from the selected cell so we have a blank slate. Then I'll go back to conditional formatting, and I'm going to go to new rule. And so this offers me a bit more flexibility. So there's a lot of different options here, like format all cells based on their values, or format only cells that contain top or bottom ranked values, stuff like this. So let's say I go to format cells based on their values, and then I hit OK. Now this is another way that we can look at a color scale. And so there's just a lot of options here, a lot to play around with, and a lot of useful features.